Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Page Turners Plus. The last time you saw and heard from us, we reviewed Kevin Jared Hussein's Hungry Ghost. Today, we'll be interviewing Kevin Jared Hussein. Welcome, Kevin.
Hi, and thank you for having me.
It is our pleasure. So, I think I could start the conversation off with finding out a bit more about you because most people who read your novel would be quite shocked to find out that you didn't actually study English literature at secondary school or university. And that's quite surprising for many of us. It was surprising even for us. And we discussed that in our review program. So, can you tell us a bit more about that and your path and transition from science to writing? And I mean, it's quite clear in your writing that you do have a very strong science background. So, can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. So I would more describe it as writing to science back to writing because I wanted to be a writer since I was about 11 years old, 10, 11 years old. And it seemed like a crazy thing to be at the time because you didn't really know anybody who was a writer. I mean, you would have heard of V.S. Naipaul and Sam Selvon and so on. But you would have found out that a lot of them had to, migrate or go away to achieve that dream. So it was a kind of crazy thing to be in Trinidad and possibly the Caribbean. So when I went to secondary school, that was my pastime. Like that was like my after school activity. Open up Microsoft Word and just start writing. And a lot of it started as fan fiction for video games. So in my secondary school, literature, English literature was not an option. We only did it in first form. You didn't do anything really with literature from then on. So a lot of my stuff in secondary school was self-taught. Is really just through reading, and I always kept doing it. So I ended up going in the scientific field, and I read a lot of science literature, and that included like Rachel Carson's Silent Spring and Darwin's journals when he went to the Galapagos Islands. And there's a way in which those are written, and you think like um, right brain, left brain with science and literature, but those are pretty not just like scientifically competently written, but they're written with a sort of artistic flourish as well because there's all these descriptions to be made, all these biological descriptions to be made, and very specific words and very beautiful language that's being used. And that really got me into building up my vocabulary. So I used to read the dictionary during dinner time because I covered like so many words that I just wanted to learn like more and more and more and more. And I realized a lot of them would kind of be useless throughout life. And but they stuck with me like since I was a teenager. In university, I tried to get into the humanities and literature, but because I didn't have the subjects to do it, they didn't let me do it. So I ended up going to do ecology and biology instead. And he kept encountering more and more words and more literature involved in this. And I always kept writing in the background. And it wasn't really something that I wanted to make a career out of. It really was just a hobby. So when I started entering anthologies and competitions, like when I used to fail to shortlist or get rejected, it never really had an effect on me because it wasn't really something that I wanted to do with my career. It's really just like a background. So as strange as it might be for people to hear that I didn't really have the academic knowledge with English literature, it's also similarly strange that this is kind of now the forefront of my career. There's something that's new and something I feel I'm always learning.
Now you said you've said elsewhere that
Mm.
the novel was largely influenced by conversations you had with your grandfather, and that sent me wondering about your research methods. Um, in one scene, there's a shocking racist poster in the police station, and then you allude to the possibility of Hindu marriages not having been recognized formally by the legal system. So I was wondering whether your research involved reading academic texts and examining historical documents. I'm just curious about what your research methods were.
Most of it was interview. And so I interviewed like some elders from the village I grew up in Caroni, as well as my father-in-law, as well as a whole bunch of eavesdropping that I've done throughout my life. So a lot of these stories sounded pretty wild to me. So I had a friend who used to he was, well, I would say he was a historian, maybe not in the academic sense, but his name was Angelo Bisesa Singh. So unfortunately, like, he passed away a few years ago. But he was like a walking encyclopedia with these things. And I would confer with him like some of these stories that my grandfather gave me. And like what one of them he gave me was this story of this woman who was probably an overseer's wife, or some British officer's wife, who came to his village when he was a teenager, and she tripped and fell, and she was wearing this white dress, he said, and tripped and fell and landed in some mud. And when she got up and someone started to laugh at her, well, like one of the village boys started to laugh at her, she like went into this fury and said that she was gonna send out an order to bulldoze the entire village. Now, to me, like, that sounded, I mean, it didn't sound like it wouldn't happen, but it sounded like, when, oh, the older folks telling these stories, you get like a sense of exaggeration. So I was like, well, I cannot take this as fact. So I'm gonna confer with Angelo, the historian, to if he ever heard of anything like that, or any situation that sounded like that, like it would be on that level. So he said that he's familiar with the village, and he checked like some archival notes and said that there was an order to to bulldoze the village, but they didn't approve the order, but it was there and it was recorded. And to me, that was crazy, because they didn't have the reason like why that was there in the first place, but the reason was in like the memories of people. It wasn't like recorded on a in a book, like in a ledger or anything like that. And as I was going through a lot of these stories here, I realized that there's a lot that's kind of that would have been lost, that is lost in the gaps between like official recording and human memory. And when it came to historical research, I believe that there's a thing like doing too much historical research. So I not that I gave up on trying to recreate like a one-to-one ratio of the world, but at a point I kind of had to let loose and let my characters breathe and live in this world I created, and more focus on their plots and the atmosphere that I wanted to build. Because a lot of the questions that I began asking in my interviews were not like historical facts. They were more like, what were the sounds you heard in the morning? What was like what was like the strange things that your neighbor did, like things like that. And or what was like, how were you treated when you went to Port of Spain, rather than trying to recreate and build stuff brick by brick. I started focusing on that instead.
Caswell?
Well, this is a wonderful train of discussion, because as a historian and a passionate about the value of oral history, particularly in the Caribbean context, I would love to ask a follow-up question, if I may.
Yeah.
Which is basically why this period, it's a really important period in Trinidad's history, and in Caribbean history more broadly. But why was it important for you to set it in this kind of early 1940s era?
Is a period that to me that hides in plain sight in Trinidad because like if you go into the University of the West Indies in St. Augustine in Trinidad, you always have to go, you can't get away from this Churchill Roosevelt highway. You have to go on that highway to get there. And I mean that highway has been there all my life. And you know, all throughout my university years, I realized I've never really deeply questioned why it was called the Churchill Roosevelt Highway because it was two different leaders at the time, you know, from the UK and the US. And I, you know, when I was in secondary school, there was, and maybe they would have talked about it in like history courses in UE, but I never really questioned why it was called that. And then, you know, it turned out to be a road that was built specifically to transport war supplies, you know, during World War II when the American Navy set up base in the Northwest Peninsula in Chaguaramas, and it was built specifically for that. It wasn't there for civilian use. So I use this as like a landmark in the book because at the time, to me, that represented the the presence of two very powerful foreign bodies in this country. And the 1940s was a time where, you know, I like to say British colonialism is is the beginning of the end for it because it was just after some labor riots that would have occurred. And it was also at the time of World War II, where the Americans and the British were quite dissimilar from each other. Apparently, they used to clash a lot. And it kind of showed like the beginning of a breakdown in leadership for the British, and where power now was beginning to be transferred to the locals, to the Trinidadian locals. And there was a story that in an interview, someone, an elder was giving me, and he was saying, I was asking him, did you like going to school? You know, at that time, because at the time you were under, you were going to missionary schools where the British were usually teachers. Did you like, you know, going to school? And he said, yeah, school was great. I was like, well, did you get like beaten a lot or flogged a lot by the teachers? He said, no, that they were actually pretty friendly. He said that the teachers that he really had to beware of was the local ones because when the white British teachers left, or were beginning to replace themselves with the brown and black skinned local teachers, nobody respected those local teachers, and as a result, they had to almost be performative and mimic what they believe was like a powerful British personality. So the 1940s was kind of like the beginning of that, and it was this transfer of power and almost misuse of power. And I wanted to write about characters that were sort of caught in the middle of that, where they would start to become their own enemies.
Thank you so much. That
Yeah.
was a really rich
Yeah.
answer.
In terms of the sort of taking you back to the whole infusion of the rich ecology into the novel, you often described the rivers and streams near the barrack by mentioning their rich biodiversity. And I was wondering if it was your intention to sort of show the natural beauty alongside the abject poverty and deprivation that existed in these barracks.
It is, and there's certain thoughts or beliefs um, within Ayurvedic cultures or Hinduism where, yeah, everything can be seen as a whole. You know, whether no matter like how we perceive it as beautiful or ugly can be perceived, you have to take it as like one. And it's the descriptions there's almost to match as what I wanted. So the book, when I was imagining, when I was writing this book, which I never really even thought would be published widely, I really thought it would just stay on my computer for a very long time. Um, when I was writing it, I was intending a lot of the description and sort of what I would imagine is the slower pace of the beginning to be more meditative, for you to kind of absorb um, these sort of atmospheric qualities of this world, for it to be almost surreal in a way, but built upon this extreme reality and this descriptive biodiversity and so on. And it is also to contrast the natural world that a lot of our our characters reside in, compared to what would be perceived as an artificial world, like for example what Marley and Dalton reside in, because I would imagine that almost like a mansion of like synthetic structures compared to the natural landscape of, the natural Trinidadian landscape. I also wanted this biodiversity to reflect a sort of sovereignty to the land where, yes, all of this is happening, and all this human suffering is happening, but this these crickets or these dragonflies are just going to carry on, and their generations might outlive all of those that are there. But just for me to get into a minor segue here, there's this train of thought that I had when I was writing it. There's this film called The Thin Red Line, 1998 Terrence Malick film, and it's a war movie. And there are a lot of war movies, and there's really only so much you can do with a war movie. This war movie is set in the Pacific, and there's this where most of the war takes place on is this very lush jungle area and this verdant meadow where like breeze is blowing, and there's all these animals that are around, but there's also bullets flying and eating up the earth, and there's also pillboxes installed atop hills with snipers, and there's grenades going off. And you get all these quick shots of people being killed and all this human suffering happening. But really, one of the most poignant shots in like one of those action scenes is that the camera sort of cuts to this bird, and the wing is broken because maybe a bullet flew through it. And I was thinking of that, and you really like you have all this happening, but it's converging upon these singular points where you start to relate human to animal and animal to human. And it's something like that is what I wanted to capture with all of these lush natural descriptions and flora and fauna, everything that you would find in the world of Hungry Ghosts.
And you did a really beautiful job of it. And I mean, as a biochemist, I mean, I'm sort of on the red biology side, but I still appreciate the
Yeah.
green biology, and it really blew me away, the ecology that was mentioned in the novel. Paula.
Ah, you were kind of, when you started speaking, you were kind of moving into a philosophical area. So I want to keep you there. Shweta leaves weeds which invade her vegetable garden undisturbed because, and I'm quoting, things push themselves into life whether you like them or not. Krishna, he tells himself, don't let the dreams fool you. This is your place in the world. And we're put into Han's head when he is thinking the insults, the discriminatory remarks, all the jaundiced eyes locking onto him as he shuffled into a general store. It did bother him. But what was the point of fighting it? They were outnumbered. Um, no, to my mind, all those trains of thought suggest to me that the characters are, they resign themselves to fate. They almost believe that they have no agency. And I was wondering whether I was projecting or whether this was intentional.
It it was intentional, and you could think of it being both ways. And I was thinking of there's a concept of like with horses, like breaking an animal, which essentially means to tame it. But it's funny to use that word break because that would imply that the animal is then broken and is no longer the animal that it would naturally be. And as I mean, humans are animals, and it's thinking the concept of breaking a human, and you have broken humans, and you would tame these humans, and they would remain calm, in such a way that you don't have to worry about them rising up against you. And that's how I thought about the ones in the barrack. And I guess if you have to if you have to use a modern term for it, it would be learned helplessness, and where you would crush an animal's desire to fight. You'd crush a person's desire to just to just be respected in their life, and they almost I'm just trying to put my thoughts together here. But as you can see, like a lot of what I was thinking when I was writing this novel was the animal world, because that's kind of like what a lot of the humans in Iraq have been reduced to, like animals in a pen. And it's almost as if they are kept in that condition, that yes, their worldview would change, that the societal structure would keep them down there as a result. So it could be both. And it seems like everywhere outside of that they don't see them as human beings anymore, but only concepts of human beings. And that to me is what I wanted to get across. And that is also why you would have, as I was saying before, a lot of animals, especially dogs, unfortunately, being used as proxies for how the humans are treated.
May I just follow up with that?
Sure.
Because I to my mind, the fatalism didn't end with just the barrack dwellers. I got a sense of fatalism throughout the novel. Like
Mhm.
nobody seemed to have been able to escape, um, just to escape what they met, how they met the world. For example, Marley was very determined to escape her origins, and she was very successful um, twice. But it seemed to me that the success was illusory. That even though she escaped the mean circumstances, the mean financial circumstances of her upbringing, her birth and her upbringing. Um, but then she went into another prison, you know. And then when Changor disappears, she gets this freedom that she was longing for. But even that was illusory. So, um, am I reading too much into thinking that the novel is essentially fatalistic?
No, you're not reading too much into it at all. I mean, the essentially this whole novel, if I was to compress it into one idea, this whole novel is really about people who have never really had a true home, and they're longing for it. It's kind of like a house for Mr. Biswas, but I actually wasn't thinking of a house for Mr. Biswas when I was writing this. But even the country itself is not their home, not just the structures that they live under. And just to touch on Mali a little bit, and there's a lot of people have told me that they have to run to the dictionary a lot with this book. And there's a very specific word that I use when describing Mali, is that she puts on maquillage, not makeup. And maquillage is basically theatrical makeup. where you go to a stage and you would play a character. And it's because I see her and Hans to a degree as being highly theatrical, where they are quite performative to the point where they have lost their former selves. Um, Mali is described as being like a sort of ship of Theseus, where you have to is like a boat, and you remove, you're constantly fixing the boat, and removing plants and removing parts and replacing it. And you don't know where the old boat ended and where the new one began. And she just, she has a thought where she feels like she's like that. Hans, on the other hand, does this in two ways. He's performative in a sense that you're never really in his mind, and he gets down on his knees and he begs for things, and he never wants to cause trouble, and it's almost as if he feigns subservience. But he also has a kind of hero complex, a savior complex in a way, where he has, there's some leaks in the barrack walls, and he has to be the one to fix it, not just for his room, but for every room. Even when he moves in, with Mali, we we're never in his head, so we don't know the reasons why he's doing what he's doing. And then, not really to spoil, but we get a brief flashback of his childhood and his mother's attempt to escape from the barrack. Her failed attempt, and to a degree, he feels like he is continuing that attempt that his mother would have wanted for herself and perhaps wanted for him. And it is likely that he never told anybody about this because he's so within himself. He keeps things to himself. He keeps secrets all the time, even from the reader, because we're in like everyone else's head except his. And as a result of that, yes, you can think of it as all of these characters, because they had to go through all these mental acrobatics that they've set themselves up to be fatalistic.
Yeah, I'm loving this conversation, Kevin. I'm like, my heart is just like leaping and thinking. My brain is happy, and this is great. Thank you so much for being here. You've talked a little bit about Marley, and it kind of makes me think about the different characters you've drawn in terms of men and women, but I think particularly the women, because I think at the beginning of the novel, when we meet these young boys, making this blood pact, and this is absolutely not a spoiler, it's really early on in the novel. It feels, I know that I will speak truthfully and say I was like, oh no, 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 I can't do the story all about boys. I can't. I'm too feminist. I'm too old. But I was delighted to find out that like there are lots of really like women are very central to the novel, really, even though ostensibly it's a novel about Krishna and his family, and lots of different male characters. Actually, women are, yeah, for lack of a better word, central to the novel. And I wondered if you could speak onto that. Like, why was that important to you, if it was important to you?
I did seek to initially write a story of what I would say is like a youth experience, even a youthful male experience, but really and truly the first character, so like when I was like making like my inspiration character map or whatever, the first character was Mali, and everyone sort of branched out from her. And it's not that I aim to lean at male or female at a point, because at both sides we see that it is torturous for both of them. But I was more thinking about the original title for the manuscript for Hungry Ghost was called Devotion. And I was thinking about all the different ways that word, all the different meanings that word has. Whereas, devotion to a spouse, devotion to childhood friends, like if you're in a gang, basically, devotion to beliefs, devotion to a lifestyle. And each character I was using them to explore those different facets of of devotion. Whereas like one character that is very much in the background is Rukmin, and she represents like these old Hindu beliefs, which mostly have died out by now. You would still find them here now, but you wouldn't like, most of it would have died off. And she represents that and almost like a upstanding devotion to that, and how that actually gets her through life, this very very difficult life. And it seems like that is not enough for some of the younger female characters, like say Shweta and Mali. And I wasn't seeking to let one group of characters be defined by the other, but I was thinking of it more like the interrelationships and the different ways in which the escape can happen from this kind of lifestyle from a male perspective and from a female perspective, where we follow Lata, a barrack girl, for a little while. And, her method of escape is to marry a village boy. There's really very little else that she can see herself doing to escape from the barrack. Whereas is almost similar with Hans, where he uses like this romantic, almost a romantic aspect to try to escape. And Shweta is a lot more logical than him. And Krishna is the one character who doesn't want to escape at all because it is not what he is not something that he subscribes to. So those were like more the things I was thinking about, like from those perspectives, like how would it affect the actual actions that you would take in order to for upward mobility.
And just to sort of build on the whole relationship between Krishna and his parents. So in
Mhm.
chapter 4, A Difficult Wife, you wrote, and I'm quoting here, sons look to their fathers when they are healthy and to their mothers when they are hurt. So when I read this, I kind of realized there's a bit of pronoun ambiguity in this statement, which could be interpreted two ways. They could refer to sons, or they could refer to fathers or mothers. So were you hinting to the reader early on of what is to come in Krishna's relationship with Hans and Shweta?
So that's a very deep reading of that line, but I really love that you pointed. I'm not gonna lie and say that it was on purpose, but the idea behind it was on purpose. The not the line itself, but the the swapping of roles between Hans and Krishna, because Hans becomes very childlike, like past the halfway point in the novel, becomes very impulsive, and Krishna at a point is the one who has to become the man of the household, and he is the one who now has to take up that role, and he is the one who is still very much a child. So he has all these emotions and new hormones running through him. But he also has to, he is now the father figure who has to bring the son figure back home because Hans has gone off to do whatever. And he is the one who's kind of, you know, he's the one who has to take care of his mother now. So I love that the line can be read like that. So when you said it like that, I was like, oh yeah, big light bulb went in my head. But the idea was there.
Dalton Shangor, we haven't discussed him yet. He's important as a catalyst and as a connecting point in this story, but he himself as a character remains very much in the shadow, kind of shrouded in mystery throughout the novel. And I was wondering whether that was a deliberate creative decision, and if so, why did you craft him in this way?
It was deliberate for him to be almost invisible. I was thinking of the highest levels of wealth, although he's not of the highest level by any means. the highest levels of wealth can buy you away from society. You can purchase you can purchase yourself out of accidents. You can purchase yourself out of crimes, and you could just purchase yourself out of having to mingle with society. You can buy yourself into isolation and invisibility to a degree where you cannot be seen. And whereas like yeah, he has disappeared, in the novel, and he has bought himself into this eccentricity where it's almost acceptable for him to be shooting a gun off in front of children, because like some people are like, oh, he's just stressed out, or the children stress him out. That's and is kind of to show that wherever he was, before the events of the novel, that he was on a whole other level, almost almost kind of folk figure like. And a lot of him also, when you buy yourself into this sort of isolation and invisibility, there's really no one there's really a great possibility that your true self is not known. So when I was writing about his characters, my decision that we wouldn't be in his head at all. We wouldn't even see him. We wouldn't have a scene with him. If he's there, it would just be through conversation. And even he's present in one of the flashbacks, but he's not really his name is present, but not he himself. And that was really what I wanted to tell with that, because there's is yeah, I could have shown him like being like there and had a flashback and being like flashy, but I think it's a lot more scary that he is invisible. Even before he has disappeared, he is seemingly totally isolated from everything. So that's the general idea. I wanted to go with that.
Yeah, I definitely read Dalton's sort of absence but ever presence as sort of a reflection of the power dynamic, whereby he is the sort of man, thinking about what you were saying about history, where you recaptured all these kind of oral histories to create this novel. His stories are most likely to be written down. His diaries are most likely to be preserved in an archive somewhere.
Mm.
He's the person whose inner thoughts you could most easily access 80 years later. And so having him silent was fine, because if you wanted to know what someone like him was lived like, there's ample evidence historically on the record for you. You didn't need it because we've heard his story 1,000 times from so many other sources. I'm going to ask a slightly different question, slightly similar question. For me, with its coming of age story set in a working class Indo-Caribbean community in wartime Trinidad, comparisons to Naipaul are almost inevitable. And I'm curious to know if on the PR trail you're doing promoting the book, people have asked many questions, but I'm going to ask hopefully a slightly different version of it, which is, to what extent is Hungry Ghost influenced by or in conversation with Miguel Street or the mystic Massa? And you mentioned briefly A House for Mr. Biswas. And I say that not only because I think there are comparisons, I think in terms of historical time period at least, but also because of the way you handle women. I think a recent rereading of the House, not the House, of Miguel Street in a book club setting, which I'd previously read and loved. I was like, I don't remember this. Misogyny. It's horrible. It's terrible. And your novel is so different in terms of how it treats women, particularly, but whilst having these other similarities. I think for me, it made it even more like quick to draw a comparison. I hope that doesn't offend you. I know people hate people.
No. Usually when I'm writing something, so just first of all, I would say, despite the similarity in theme to A House of Mr. Biswas, very little of it is inspired by Naipaul, because I'm not really a fan of of his work. I can appreciate it, but it doesn't really hold much sway over me. If there was a Caribbean novel that did have a lot of influence on this, it would be No Pain Like This Body by Harold Sonny Ladu, and they recently re-released that book. I think through Penguin Random House. I think they last year. Similar setting, set in a barrack, though not in the 1940s and 1900s or 1920s, and not the same story, of course, but similar setting and atmosphere, and almost this rigidity, this firm belief, this firm adherence to this very torturous lifestyle. Now, when it comes to women, this might come off as a bit corny, but there's this test that is usually applied to literature and movies, and ever since I've read about it, I've kind of kept self-aware of it. It's called the Bechdel test, and the Bechdel test says that if you fail the Bechdel test, if you pass the Bechdel test, I should say, it means that you have two female characters in a novel that have a conversation that is not about a man. Because typically, like in a lot of older novels, the women are defined by the men that they are attracted to, or defined by the actions of the man. And I was thinking about the type of lifestyle that it had in the 40s and before. And yes, you had to be together as a family unit, but you were very ever really defined um, by that family unit. You had to be ready to be, you had to be prepared for independence at any point, because the disease and malady was so frequent, and murders and disappearance were so, so frequent. And then you just had the flat out fact of the men running away. And women had to redefine themselves at a very early point in this type of lifestyle. And that is like how is the concept that I wanted to keep in mind when I was writing about a lot of these female characters here.
Thank you. Also, in the Bechdel test, the characters have to have names. The two women have to
They have to have
names.
names. Yeah, two main characters.
They can't be girl or woman.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So, Kevin, in our discussion of this novel, we sort of had differences in who we could forgive and who we couldn't forgive. So, I wanted to ask you, in your mind, are any characters villains?
No, actually, so there was this minor life event that I had in mind. So I have dogs. I have cats too, but I have yard dogs in my yard. And a few years ago, one of them, and they're actually small dogs, and one of them escaped from the yard, and she was kind of running down the road towards the savannah, and there was this old man there with what I assume is who I assume is his grandson, and to be about 7 years old. So granddaughter, sorry, to be about 7 years old. And the the dog wasn't close to them, but she was maybe, if the dog were to suddenly get angry, maybe it could have gotten there in 30 seconds or so. I don't know. But the dog is not that type of dog, but that guy doesn't know that. So he was telling the grandchild to pick up this huge stone, right? And throw else at the dog. And so the child did it, and it hit the dog. So I was obviously very upset. And I went to retrieve the dog, got back, and treated the wound. And the both of them went along their way. So when the anger and the ire subsided, I was really thinking about it, and I was thinking about, well, from my viewpoint, that guy is a villain, because the dog is harmless. He doesn't know that, but the dog is harmless, and he is instructing the grandchild to inflict violence upon an animal. But if you were to flip it, and he was telling his story, he is the hero, because he is defending his grandchild. And neither of us are wrong in a way. And I was thinking about the characters that we have in this book. And I would say each character is believing that they're doing the right thing. And Mali is we start off with her and we start off following her for the first half of the story. We're very upfront. We're very walking side by side with her. Then we stop walking side by side with her, and she returns, and we don't know what she's turned into. But we're walking side by side with her as if she's a hero in the story because now she's kind of reclaiming everything, and she is almost like, I guess, what you would call in a modern day a kind of girl boss, where she's like, no, not gonna save this man. I'm just gonna keep all the riches to myself. I'm gonna keep this lifestyle, and nobody could do anything about it. And I'm gonna get this man that I'm attracted to. I'm going to be the hero in my story where I've been victimized my entire life. But when she disappears and we start seeing it from Krishna's viewpoint and Shweta's viewpoint instead, we see it in a totally different way. And we don't know what has happened in that gap, that silence. So I was thinking of it like that, where yeah, you would be the hero. It really depends on what side you're telling the story from. And so there's in a way there's no villains in the story, and I guess that lends itself to a greater degree of tragedy to it because there's no victory really to be had on either side.
Wow, that's a powerful note to end on. Unfortunately,
Mhm.
we are out of time for our interview with Kevin Jared Hussein, but it has been a wonderful conversation, and I'm really loving these conversations that Page Turners Plus is having. Thank you
Thank
for
you
joining
so
us,
much.
Kevin. Yes. And thank you to our viewers for staying with us. We've been doing a wonderful project over the last year and a half or so. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a lovely day.
This is a reading from chapter 1. So, in this part of the novel, Dalton Chango, a wealthy landowner, has disappeared, and Mali, his young wife, seems reluctant to search for him. And in this part of chapter 1, we slowly start to realize why she seems reluctant to search for her missing husband. The morning after the note, Mali went downstairs to prepare breakfast. Dalton wasn't there. Usually, he would be at the kitchen table with his bifocals, skimming the newspaper. He brewed his own coffee and drank until his nerves were shut. Preferred imported Arabica to the locally grown Robusta. Marley maintained the house, did the washing, the folding, the sweeping, dusting, chopping, cooking, the baking. Did it for her own sake at least. There were never any guests, soirees, coffee clutches, birthday parties. The living room, kitchen, bedrooms, the wainscoted staircase only held memories of them both. Because of this, the house always felt like some concealed shrine. The wordless stillness of the house now made the gloom of the air more apparent, its silence holy and eerie. For most of the day, she was a ghost roaming a haunted manor. If he wasn't in the kitchen, perhaps he was in the outhouse, a single room shed that he had fashioned into some sort of strange sanctum, an nymphium that held nothing but a giant oil painting of a Chinese goddess. He made it clear Mali was never to enter unless he was there too, as if she were too profane for it. The goddess, like the dogs, had been there before her. The goddess, draped in lavender and topped with a phoenix crown, was surrounded by 4 jade maidens and giant messenger bluebirds. Mali very slowly turned the knob, tipping the door open. Dust wafted like snowfall within the dim, tomb-like room. Dalton wasn't there. The goddess and her maidens glared at her sternly, as if she had interrupted some invocation. It was only recently that Dalton had shared the goddess's name with Mali, Ji Wang Mu, Queen Mother of the West. One day, Dalton admitted that his mother's soul had been absorbed by the painting and spoke to him through the canvas. Mali also learned that the apparition had once been impressed with her and even suggested his marriage to her, but no more. His mother now saw Mali as a liar and a charlatan. That woman simply isn't devoted, Dalton. Dalton confessed that there was little he could do to change his mother's mind. All of this he had divulged to her unprovoked. Marley married Dalton, knowing he was unsound of mind, but his condition had significantly worsened over the past 5 years. Paranoia, dementia, monomania. She wasn't sure how to describe it. He had rooms with towers of newspapers and magazines and boxes and all sorts of ephemera. Flew into rages at the slightest mention of tidying those rooms. The house itself was a hodgepodge of things foreign and colonial and antebellum and pretty and gold and red and scintillating. It was ungainly and disgusting, just like him.